He walked into the bakery to buy an engagement cake, and instead found the woman he once loved holding a little girl who looked exactly like him. And in that moment, the life he built began to fall apart. The moment Ethan Winslow pushed open the door of the small bakery on Maple Street, his entire future, carefully designed, perfectly arranged, and strategically planned, began to crack in a way he couldn't yet understand. He had come for something simple, something almost embarrassingly mundane for a man of his status, an engagement cake. A symbolic piece of sugar and flour to seal a deal between two powerful families. But the sweet smell of vanilla, caramel, and warm dough hit him like a memory he had sworn he'd buried long ago. The bell above the door chimed, light and innocent, but Ethan felt tension rise in his chest as if the sound were a warning. He stepped inside, tall, impeccably dressed, the embodiment of a millionaire CEO who never lost control. Even the soft winter sunlight reflecting off his blonde hair made him look almost unreal, like a man sculpted specifically for success. He rehearsed his order in his mind, wanting nothing more than to get this done quickly and return to his world where emotions were unnecessary and predictable outcomes were guaranteed. But the universe had no intention of letting him leave unshaken. Because she was there. Behind the counter, in a crisp white baker's uniform smudged with a touch of flour near the collarbone, stood Harper Morgan. His Harper. The woman he once loved with a naive certainty that felt impossible in the cold, structured life he lived now. Her brown hair was tied into a loose ponytail that left a few strands falling softly near her cheeks, and her blue eyes, those same eyes he used to trace with his fingertips, lifted to meet his. For a moment, she froze too. Not dramatically, not with horror, but with the stunned stillness of someone who believed the past was gone forever only to find it standing 3 feet away wearing a tailored coat and a watch worth more than a small apartment. Before Ethan could speak, before he could even swallow the sudden dryness in his throat, movement caught his eye. A tiny girl, no older than 3, nestled on Harper's hip. Blonde hair that glowed under the bakery lights. Blue eyes bright enough to steal the air from his lungs. A pink dress. And on her head, slightly crooked, a miniature baker's hat that made her look like she had stepped out of a storybook. The little girl blinked at him with such open curiosity that something inside Ethan twisted sharply. She wasn't just cute or charming or unexpectedly present. She was familiar. Too familiar. Harper shifted slightly, tightening her hold on the child as if bracing herself for impact. Ethan's heart hammered, and for the first time in years he felt genuinely unprepared. His world relied on numbers, forecasts, mergers, calculated decisions. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for this moment. He opened his mouth, unsure of what he meant to say, unsure if he could say anything at all. The bakery around him hummed with soft music, warm lights, and the comforting scent of pastries, yet he felt as if the ground beneath him had tilted. Harper's voice broke the silence first, gentle but strained. "Hello, Ethan." It was all it took for his carefully built composure to begin to fall apart, and for a shocking, electrifying question to form in the back of his mind, one he didn't dare voice but couldn't escape. Why did that little girl look so much like him? Ethan struggled to gather himself as Harper's greeting settled into the warm, vanilla-scented air. He had imagined this moment countless times in restless nights years ago, back when he still allowed himself the weakness of wondering what her life had become, but none of those imaginings came close to the raw truth of seeing her now. She looked older in the way people do when they've lived through storms rather than time, but there was a quiet strength in her eyes that hadn't been there before, something both calming and distant at once. And then there was the child, her daughter, watching him with open fascination, clutching the fabric of Harper's uniform with one tiny hand while the other toyed with the strap of the baker's hat on her head. Harper managed a small, polite smile, the kind people use when they aren't sure whether to run or pretend everything is fine. Ethan forced himself to breathe, to return the smile, to remember how conversations were supposed to work, but his attention kept pulling back to the girl. She was studying him with a seriousness far beyond her age, as if she were trying to decide who he was before anyone introduced him. Harper noticed his gaze and instinctively shifted the little girl slightly behind her, not protectively, but in a way that revealed she had learned to anticipate the world's unpredictability. "I didn't expect to see you here," Harper said quietly, smoothing the child's hair. "The store isn't exactly on your usual route." Ethan tried to answer lightly, but the words came out rougher than he intended. "I'm here to order a cake. For my engagement." The last word tasted heavier than it should have, and Harper's fingers paused for the briefest heartbeat before she continued straightening her daughter's baker's hat. She didn't congratulate him. She didn't ask for details. She simply nodded, her expression controlled but not cold, and he realized that she had become skilled at containing emotions he once knew by heart. The little girl leaned forward on Harper's arm, still staring at him with disarming openness. "Your eyes are like mine," she announced with the gentle confidence only a small child could possess. Her voice was soft and melodic, carrying no suspicion or fear, just pure, honest observation. The world around Ethan seemed to dim for a moment. Harper's breath hitched, her shoulders stiffening. Ethan swallowed hard, feeling something powerful and unfamiliar surge in his chest. He wasn't sure whether it was shock or recognition or both tangled into something impossible to ignore. Harper touched the child's back gently, trying to redirect her attention, but the girl kept looking at him, waiting for a response. "What's your name?" Ethan managed, his voice unsteady in a way he hoped neither of them would notice. "Lily," the girl said proudly, pressing her cheek against Harper's shoulder. Ethan repeated the name silently, committing it to memory with an intensity that startled him. Lily. A simple name, beautiful and soft, and now lodged in a part of him he hadn't known was still alive. Harper cleared her throat. "She's at that age where she notices everything," she said, avoiding his gaze as she spoke. "Don't take it personally." But how could he not? The resemblance was undeniable. The timing was impossible to ignore. And the way Harper said the words, careful, measured, almost rehearsed, told him she had imagined this moment too, but with far more dread than hope. Ethan felt the weight of unspoken questions pressing against his ribs. He wanted to ask who the father was, wanted to demand answers he knew he had no right to demand, wanted to step closer to see her face more clearly, to hear her laugh, to understand why his heart reacted so violently to a child he had just met. But he held himself still, aware that one wrong word could shatter the fragile civility between them. Harper finally looked up, meeting his eyes with quiet resolve. "Lily is my daughter," she said, her voice steady but soft, as if she were bracing herself for his reaction. And even though she didn't give him any more information than that, Ethan felt the ground shift beneath him again. Something was unfolding here, something deeper, heavier, and far more life-altering than a simple reunion. And although Harper clearly wanted to maintain control of the moment, Ethan knew, with sudden clarity, that the truth hovering between them would not stay buried for long. Ethan left the bakery that day carrying nothing but questions, yet each one felt heavier than the last. In the back seat of his car, with the city blurring past the windows, he found himself pulled backward in time to the years he had tried so hard to forget. People like to imagine that the wealthy and ambitious carved their futures cleanly, neatly, without hesitation, but the truth was that Ethan had once stood at a crossroads trembling with uncertainty. 3 years earlier, he had been offered the kind of position that could transform a promising executive into a corporate titan, a role that demanded absolute loyalty, relentless focus, and sacrifices he wasn't supposed to hesitate to make. The promotion came with a warning disguised as advice: anything that distracted him would jeopardize his ascent. And among those distractions, they meant relationships, especially ones rooted in real emotion rather than convenience. Back then, Harper had been a dreamer with sleeves dusted in flour and notebooks filled with half-tested recipes. She would show him sketches of pastries in the margins of her textbooks and talk endlessly about opening her own bakery, a place filled with light, color, warmth, and the kind of desserts that made people feel less alone. She was passionate and imaginative, a contrast to his polished, measured world. He admired her fiercely for it, even envied her at times, but he also believed that love could wait while opportunity could not. When the company's board flew him to New York for meetings that stretched until dawn, when he was told that his future required clean lines and clean decisions, he chose the path that seemed logical. He told Harper they needed space. He told himself it was temporary. He told everyone else it was necessary. He didn't see how deeply it gutted her until it was too late. Harper didn't beg him to stay or argue or cry on the night they ended things. She simply listened, nodded slowly, and whispered that she hoped he would get everything he wanted. That quiet grace should have reassured him. Instead, it left him feeling like he'd walked away from something irreplaceable. She moved out of their shared apartment within a week, leaving behind nothing but a folded apron and a handwritten recipe for cinnamon brioche that still smelled faintly of her perfume. Ethan buried himself in work until exhaustion blurred the days together, convincing himself that ambition required a little emotional amputation. And because Harper hadn't reached out and he hadn't dared to call, they drifted apart as if the years they spent together had been a brief, impossible dream. But there were moments, rare, unwelcome moments, when the memories pierced him unexpectedly. Passing a bakery on a corner. Catching the scent of vanilla while walking through a hotel lobby. Listening to someone laugh with that same breathless joy Harper used to have when she perfected a new recipe. He would push those memories aside quickly, claiming he didn't have time to dwell on what was over, yet some part of him always wondered what her life had become and whether she had found someone who supported her the way he failed to. Now, sitting alone in his office with the city skyline glowing behind him, Ethan felt all those buried regrets rising like a tide he could no longer hold back. Harper had a daughter. A little girl with blonde hair and blue eyes. A little girl whose smile had struck him with a familiarity he couldn't explain away. He pressed his hands against his face, trying to steady his breathing, but the more he thought about it, the more the pieces aligned with frightening precision. Harper's silence. Her sudden disappearance from his world. The timing that didn't feel coincidental anymore. The small, startled shadow in her eyes when Lily said they looked alike. He remembered the last night they spent together before he took the promotion, a night both tender and heartbreaking because neither of them admitted they felt the end approaching. That night kept replaying in his mind now, looping insistently, as though urging him to confront something he had spent years running from. If Lily was his daughter, if he had missed her first words, first steps, first everything, then the life he believed he had under control was built on a void he never knew existed. He stood and paced the room as the realization settled deeper, heavier. Harper had raised that little girl alone. She had carried the burden of a secret while he climbed corporate ladders and posed for magazine covers that praised him for his discipline and clarity. But if she had truly believed he deserved to know, she would have found him. Which meant she must have convinced herself that Ethan Winslow, the man he used to be, wouldn't have chosen them even if he had been told. That thought alone sliced through him with a quiet brutality he wasn't prepared for. For the first time in a long while, Ethan wondered whether the greatest mistake of his life wasn't the relationship he abandoned, but the version of himself he allowed the world to shape. He had become everything his mentors admired, efficient, powerful, emotionally unreachable, but at what cost? And now, as the truth edged closer, he felt the old world he had spent years constructing begin to tremble under the weight of something far more human and infinitely more terrifying: responsibility, connection, and the possibility that his choices had left scars deeper than he ever imagined. He didn't know yet how to face Harper, didn't know what questions he had the right to ask or whether she would even allow him to be part of the conversation. But one thing had become painfully clear: whatever future he thought he had planned was no longer solid. It was shifting, reshaping itself around a revelation he could neither escape nor ignore. And somewhere out there was a little girl with bright blue eyes who might be linked to him in a way that would change everything. Ethan returned to the bakery 2 days later, though he told himself it was only because he needed to finalize the details of the engagement cake. It was a weak excuse, flimsy enough that even his assistant raised an eyebrow when he cleared his schedule for the morning, but he couldn't bring himself to care. He needed clarity, answers, something tangible to ground the whirlwind of thoughts that had been consuming him since the moment he saw Lily's bright blue eyes. The memory of that tiny voice telling him they looked alike had replayed in his mind with relentless persistence, leaving him restless at night and unfocused at work. Even Cassandra, his fiancée, had noticed his distraction and questioned him at dinner, but Ethan evaded her inquiries with a practiced ease that left him feeling unexpectedly hollow. When he stepped inside Sugar Bloom again, the familiar chime of the doorbell carried a weight it hadn't before. The warm, sweet scent of baked goods wrapped around him quickly, but instead of offering comfort, it heightened his tension. Harper was working behind the counter, her hair pulled into a neat bun this time, her uniform crisp and clean, but exhaustion lingered subtly around her eyes. Lily was perched on a small stool nearby, drawing with bright crayons on a sheet of parchment paper, humming softly as she worked. Harper noticed Ethan first, her posture stiffening imperceptibly, though she forced a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Back again?" she asked gently, though there was a trace of wariness beneath the surface. Before he could respond, Lily looked up from her drawing and beamed with innocent delight. "Hi," she chirped, lifting her paper to show him a colorful scribble that resembled a cupcake wearing sunglasses. Ethan felt the tightness in his chest ease just slightly, surprised by how instinctively he smiled back. He approached slowly, aware of Harper's watchful gaze. "That's very impressive," he said softly, studying Lily's drawing. "Are you an artist?" She giggled, nodding proudly before returning to her coloring with determined focus. Harper stepped closer, as if grounding herself before whatever conversation she sensed was coming. "If you're here for the cake, I've already started working on the design," she said, her voice controlled, professional, but undeniably tense. Ethan nodded, though that wasn't what had brought him back. He took a quiet breath, searching for words that wouldn't shatter the fragile space between them. "Harper," he began carefully, "can we talk? Not about the cake. About that day." Her eyes flickered briefly, betraying the storm behind them. She set down the spatula she'd been holding, wiping her hands on a towel with slow precision. "Ethan, I don't think there's anything to discuss," she said, though her tone lacked conviction. "You came in for a cake. I gave you the details. That's all." But Ethan wasn't willing to accept that anymore. He glanced toward Lily, who was now humming to herself again, oblivious to the rising tension between the adults. "She looks like me," he said quietly, his voice almost breaking under the weight of the words. Harper inhaled sharply, her shoulders tightening as if absorbing a physical blow. "Harper, please. I need to know." The room seemed to shrink around them, the warm bakery lights dimming beneath the intensity of the moment. Harper stared at him for a long time, her expression shifting between fear, anger, and something else he couldn't quite decipher. Finally, she let out a slow breath and leaned against the counter, as though standing upright had become too heavy. "The truth is complicated," she murmured, keeping her voice low enough that Lily wouldn't hear. "And I don't want to have this conversation while she's right here." Ethan nodded immediately, understanding more in what she didn't say than in what she did. But Harper wasn't finished. She closed her eyes briefly, gathering strength before looking at him with a vulnerability that struck him harder than any accusation could have. "You walked away from us before you even knew there was an U.S. I never wanted to burden you with something you never asked for," she whispered. "I had no reason to believe you'd stay, even if I told you." Ethan felt the words sink into him with a slow, crushing ache. He opened his mouth to respond, but Harper shook her head, silencing him gently. "I'll tell you everything," she promised quietly, "but not now. Not in front of her. Give me a little time." He nodded again, though waiting felt almost unbearable. Still, he understood the gravity of what she was offering, the truth he had spent days fearing and craving in equal measure. As he prepared to leave, Lily rushed over, holding out another drawing, this one a stick figure with blonde hair and big blue circles for eyes. "This is you," she declared proudly, and something inside Ethan cracked completely. When he stepped outside, the sunlight felt harsher, the air colder, and the weight of reality heavier than ever. He had come for a cake, but everything in his life was beginning to unravel, thread by delicate thread, pulled loose by the innocent smile of a child who didn't yet know the chaos she'd awakened. Ethan barely slept in the days that followed, lying awake in the dark with the city lights flickering across his ceiling like restless thoughts that refused to dim. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lily's face, round, bright, angelic, and each time, the resemblance struck him with a force that felt almost cruel. He replayed his past with Harper over and over again, searching for moments he might have overlooked, signs he should have noticed, words she might have tried to say. But the truth was painfully simple: he hadn't been listening back then, too consumed by ambition to imagine that life could unfold in ways not outlined in his 5-year plan. Now that neglect was echoing back at him in the shape of a little girl who might be his daughter. His confusion deepened into something heavier, a blend of guilt, fear, and a fierce longing he hadn't expected. He wanted answers, yes, but more than that, he wanted to understand what had happened to the woman he once loved and what burdens she had carried alone. His fiancée, Cassandra, noticed his distance almost immediately. At a charity gala, she nudged him sharply when he didn't respond to a question from a senator's wife, her smile brittle as she whispered that he needed to pull himself together. Later that evening, she asked if he was having doubts about the wedding, but he brushed her off with a practiced charm that rang hollow even to his own ears. Standing beside Cassandra, surrounded by gold champagne flutes and staged laughter, Ethan felt like he was living inside a glass case, well-lit, admired, and completely suffocating. Harper's small bakery, with its soft music and imperfect warmth, suddenly felt more real than anything in his polished world. On the 4th morning, unable to endure another hour of speculation, Ethan drove back to Sugar Bloom. The shop hadn't opened yet, but Harper was inside prepping dough at a stainless steel counter dusted in flour. She looked tired, her hair slightly undone, her posture tense. Lily was in the back room, playing with measuring cups as if they were musical instruments. When Harper noticed Ethan at the door, her eyes widened in surprise, then softened with resignation. She let him in without a word and locked the door behind him, creating a fragile cocoon of privacy. They stood in silence for a moment, each waiting for the other to begin. Harper wiped her hands on a flour-covered towel before meeting his gaze with quiet determination. "You want the truth," she said, her voice steadier than he expected. "And you deserve to hear it. But you need to know that it's not as simple as you might think." Ethan felt his pulse quicken. "Just tell me, Harper. I can handle it." She shook her head slightly. "Handling it isn't the problem. Accepting the consequences is." She moved to the counter, as if she needed something solid to lean on. Her eyes flickered briefly toward the back room, where Lily was humming to herself, unaware of how her existence was reshaping everything. "When you left," Harper began slowly, "I told myself it was the right thing. You had dreams that didn't include small-town bakeries or the kind of messy life most people have. I knew you were choosing a future that demanded every part of you, and I didn't want to be the reason you hesitated. But a few weeks after you were gone, I started feeling sick. I thought it was stress or the grief of losing someone I cared about, but it didn't go away." She paused, her breath catching slightly. "Then I found out I was pregnant." Ethan's heart lurched. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words tangled in his throat. Harper continued before he could gather himself. "I wasn't ready. I was terrified. And I was alone. But even then, I didn't call you. Not because I wanted to keep her from you, but because I knew what your life had become. I had watched you change during those last months together, your focus narrowing, your priorities shifting, your world filling up with people who expected you to become someone bigger, sharper, more ruthless. I convinced myself that you wouldn't want this. That you wouldn't want her. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't let the tears fall. And I wasn't going to beg for a place in a life you'd already chosen without me. Ethan stepped closer, trying to steady his voice. Harper, I should have known. I should have been there. You shouldn't have had to do this alone. She looked away, pain tightening her features. That's the thing, Ethan. I didn't think you wanted to be there. I thought telling you would force you into a life you didn't want, and I couldn't be the person who trapped you. So I stayed silent. I built a life around her. And I told myself that I made the right decision. A long, weighted pause settled between them. Ethan felt the truth hit him with a sharp, irreversible force. Harper hadn't been hiding Lily out of spite, she had been protecting herself, protecting her daughter, and perhaps even protecting him from a version of fatherhood he might have resented. But fate had thrown them back into each other's lives anyway, shattering every assumption they had made to survive the past 3 years. Ethan finally found his voice, low and raw. I want to be in her life, Harper. I don't care how complicated it is. I don't care what it costs. I want to know her. I want to know you again. I want to fix what I broke. Harper's expression flickered, torn between hope and fear. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she glanced toward the back room where Lily began singing an off-key nursery rhyme, blissfully unaware of how her little voice had changed the trajectory of everything. You can try, Harper whispered at last, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the counter. But nothing will ever be the same again. And for the first time, Ethan didn't flinch from the weight of that truth. He welcomed it. Ethan left the bakery that morning with the truth burning in his chest like a fire he couldn't smother. Harper's words had rooted themselves so deeply in him that the drive back to his penthouse felt surreal, as though he were navigating 2 different worlds at once. In one world, he was still the disciplined CEO preparing for an engagement that promised strategic alliances and polished perfection. In the other, he had just discovered that a little girl with blue eyes and flower-dusted cheeks might be the piece of his life he had unknowingly been missing. The contrast between those worlds became impossible to ignore by the time he reached the lobby of his building, where sleek marble floors and faint classical music suddenly felt cold, sterile, and profoundly disconnected from the warmth he had just left behind. Cassandra was waiting for him upstairs, ready to discuss wedding details with a binder full of fabric swatches, seating charts, and partnerships disguised as invitations. She greeted him with a kiss on the cheek and a comment about how late he was, but Ethan hardly heard her. As she spoke, outlining how their union would benefit both families and how the press coverage would be impeccable if they handled it correctly, he watched her with a strange, growing clarity. Cassandra was beautiful, composed, brilliant in the way ambitious people are when their lives are built like equations, but she had never looked at him the way Harper once did, never with softness, never with wonder, never with anything except strategic expectation. He felt suddenly suffocated by the immaculate space around them and the weight of a future that felt less like a life and more like a prescription. When Cassandra finally paused long enough to notice his silence, she frowned, closing the binder with a sharp snap. "You're distracted again," she said irritably, crossing her arms. "This is the 3rd time this week. Are you having doubts, Ethan?" Her tone was clipped, not wounded, more irritated than concerned, as though his hesitation were an inconvenience rather than a matter of emotion. Ethan rubbed a hand over his jaw, feeling the tension radiate through him. "It's not doubts," he answered, though he realized as he spoke that this wasn't entirely true. "There are things happening that I need to sort through." Cassandra raised an eyebrow. "Things? What kind of things?" He hesitated, knowing she expected concrete explanations, but the truth was too delicate and too new to lay before someone who saw relationships as transactions. "Personal things," he said quietly, and Cassandra's expression shifted immediately into annoyance. She stepped closer, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. "Ethan, we don't have room for personal crises right now. The merger depends on this wedding." Do you understand how many people are counting on us? Something inside him cracked. He looked at Cassandra, not at the woman he was supposed to marry, but at the version of himself he would have to become to stay with her. A version that required numbness, obedience, and a heart kept far from anything unpredictable or real. He couldn't do it anymore. Not after seeing Harper. Not after learning about Lily. Not after realizing that his future had already shifted without his permission, pulling him toward a life he had abandoned before it even began. He took a slow breath and met Cassandra's gaze without flinching. "The wedding isn't going to happen," he said, and the simplicity of the statement startled even him. Cassandra stared at him for several seconds, her expression unreadable, until a sharp laugh escaped her lips. "You're joking," she said, stepping back as if he'd told her something absurd. But Ethan didn't waver. "I'm not." The air in the room grew taut, thick with disbelief and anger. Cassandra's laughter died, replaced by a cold fury that sharpened every line of her face. "Is this about another woman?" she demanded. "Because if you think you can throw everything away for someone meaningless." "She's not meaningless," Ethan interrupted, his voice firm. It shocked Cassandra enough that she stopped speaking. He swallowed hard, choosing his words carefully. "Her name is Harper. And she has a daughter. A little girl who might be mine." Cassandra's eyes widened, and for the first time, he saw genuine astonishment break through her controlled demeanor. "You have a child," she whispered, as though the very idea scandalized her more than the end of the wedding. Ethan shook his head. "I don't know that yet. But I intend to find out. And I intend to be part of her life if she is." Cassandra stepped back slowly, her breath unsteady with outrage. "You're throwing away everything we built for a child you didn't even know existed? For a woman who left you?" Ethan exhaled, feeling the truth settle comfortably, solidly inside him. "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm choosing the right thing for the first time in a long time." Cassandra stared at him as if she no longer recognized him at all. Then, without another word, she grabbed her binder and walked out, her heels snapping like small explosions with every step. When the door slammed behind her, Ethan felt a wave of unexpected relief crash over him. For years, he had moved through life like a machine engineered for success, but in that moment, he finally felt human again, fallible, frightened, hopeful. Later that evening, as he stood by the window overlooking the city that once defined him, he realized that the future he wanted wasn't built in boardrooms or ballrooms. It was waiting in a small bakery on Maple Street, where a little girl with blue eyes drew cupcakes with crayons and a woman he once lost still carried pieces of his heart she never asked for. And for the first time in years, Ethan wasn't afraid of what came next. He was ready for it. Ethan began showing up at Sugar Bloom with a consistency that surprised even him, though he tried not to make it obvious by spacing out his visits at first. Yet no matter how hard he attempted to disguise his intentions, Harper always seemed to sense when he entered the bakery. Her back would straighten, her hands would still for a fraction of a second, and her eyes would soften in a way that suggested resignation mixed with something far more complicated. Lily, on the other hand, reacted to him with effortless enthusiasm. She would squeal his name, sometimes mispronouncing it into a two-syllable melody, and run to him with her tiny arms outstretched, leaving flowery fingerprints on his expensive suits that he wore afterward like badges of honor rather than inconveniences. Every time she reached for him, something inside Ethan stirred with a fierce tenderness that he couldn't fully explain, though he knew better than to push Harper for answers she wasn't ready to give. As days turned into weeks, Ethan found himself helping with small tasks around the bakery, moving flour bags, fixing a flickering light, restocking sugar jars, though he knew Harper could do all of it herself. Still, she let him help without protest, and that small permission felt monumental. In the quiet hours before closing, he would linger, sitting on a wooden stool while Harper decorated pastries with steady, practiced movements. Lily often sat on his lap, tired from the day, her head resting on his chest as she drifted between wakefulness and dreams. Ethan had never imagined that a child could fall asleep so easily against him, trusting him completely without requiring any proof of who he was. The first time she did it, he barely moved for nearly an hour, afraid to disturb the fragile sense of belonging warming his heart. The more time he spent with them, the more vividly he realized how much life he had missed. Lily had a stubborn streak, a playful mischief, and a laugh so bright it seemed to refill the room with sunlight each time she let it loose. Harper possessed the same gentle resilience he remembered, but now it was tempered by maturity and a strength that came from navigating hardship alone. Her dreams had not vanished, instead, she had molded them around circumstances that would have broken many others. Watching her work, flour on her hands, concentration etched on her brow, lips curved in quiet satisfaction whenever she perfected a design, pulled Ethan into a world that felt warmer and more real than anything he had ever built in the corporate towers of his success. Yet beneath the sweetness of these new routines, doubt lingered between them like a shadow that neither wanted to acknowledge. Harper still kept her guard up, not harshly, but with the careful restraint of someone who had been forced to rebuild trust one cautious piece at a time. Sometimes, when she caught him watching Lily with barely contained wonder, she would look away quickly, as though protecting herself from the hope she feared might betray her again. Ethan understood her caution, even respected it, but his desire to prove himself grew stronger with each passing day. One evening, a storm rolled in unexpectedly, drenching the streets and rattling the windows with gusts of wind. The bakery's closing hour had already passed, but Harper hadn't asked him to leave, and Lily had fallen asleep early, curled atop a pile of aprons in the back room. Harper was washing dishes, her movements slower than usual, and Ethan sensed something heavy on her mind. He approached softly, leaning against the counter beside her. "You're quiet today," he said, not accusingly, but with honest concern. Harper kept her eyes on the soapy water for a moment before answering. "I'm trying to figure out what comes next," she murmured. "For Lily. For myself. For you." Her voice trembled slightly, and Ethan felt the urge to take her hand, though he restrained himself. She set down a plate, rinsed it carefully, and dried her hands before finally facing him. "I never planned for any of this," she admitted. "I built a life around Lily that made sense, even if it wasn't easy. And now you're here, and you're different from the man you used to be, and I don't know what that means." Ethan inhaled slowly, choosing his words with the kind of precision he usually reserved for multimillion-dollar negotiations. "It means I'm trying," he said quietly. "Not to fix everything in one day. Not to undo the past. Just to be here. To show you that I'm not walking away again." Harper's eyes searched his, and for the first time since their reunion, she didn't look away immediately. The vulnerability that flickered across her face was so raw, so honest, that Ethan felt humbled by the trust she was letting surface, even in such a fragile form. "Lily adores you," she whispered. "She doesn't understand who you might be yet, but she feels something. Children are perceptive." Ethan swallowed hard, both moved and terrified by what her words implied. Harper stepped a little closer, lowering her voice even further. "If you're going to be in her life, Ethan, you have to be consistent. You can't disappear when things get complicated. You can't make promises you won't keep. She's never known what it feels like to lose someone she trusts. I won't let her learn that from you." He didn't flinch. Instead, he nodded with a conviction that rose from a place deeper than logic or pride. "I won't leave," he said, each word spoken with steady certainty. "I made mistakes before, but I'm not that man anymore. I don't want a life built on deals and expectations. I want something real. I want the chance to know her, and to earn back whatever place I lost in your life." Harper's eyes softened, glistening with emotions she struggled to contain. For a moment, it seemed she might reach for him, but then Lily stirred in the back room, releasing a soft whimper. Harper turned instinctively, maternal instinct guiding her before thought could intervene. Ethan watched her kneel beside the little girl, brushing her hair gently and whispering soothing words until she settled again. The sight cut through whatever doubts remained in him. This was where he wanted to be, where he should have been all along. The storm outside intensified, but inside the bakery, he felt an unusual sense of calm, as though something long fragmented was finally beginning to piece itself together. And as Harper returned to stand beside him, her expression no longer guarded but cautiously hopeful, Ethan knew he was ready to fight for a future he once believed he didn't deserve. A future with them. Ethan arrived at Sugar Bloom earlier than usual that evening, long after the rainstorm had passed and the streets glistened with reflections of warm shop lights. He told himself he had come to help Harper close up, but the truth was that anticipation had been tugging at him since dawn, urging him forward with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. When he stepped inside, the bakery was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint rustle of Lily giggling behind the counter as she tried to stack cupcake liners into a tower. Harper looked up from wiping a table and greeted him with a smile that was no longer guarded, though still tinged with caution. Something in her expression, however, hinted that she had made peace with the idea of him being present, at least for this moment. They worked together in an easy rhythm, sweeping the floors, organizing displays, and washing the last of the mixing bowls. Ethan found himself glancing at Harper every now and then, watching the way she moved through the space with quiet ownership and a kind of grace born not from elegance but from resilience. Lily eventually tired and toddled over to him, lifting her arms in a silent request. Without hesitation, he scooped her up, feeling her tiny hands curl into the fabric of his shirt as she rested her head on his shoulder. Harper watched the scene unfold with a softness that made Ethan's heart clench, because it wasn't the distant sadness he had sometimes seen on her face, it was a small but unmistakable glimmer of hope. When the last light was turned off in the front display and Lily was tucked onto a blanket with her stuffed bear, Harper gestured for Ethan to follow her into the backyard of the bakery. He hadn't noticed it before, hidden behind a wooden gate, but the moment he stepped outside, he felt as if he'd entered another world. String lights hung across the narrow courtyard, casting a warm glow on the brick walls and wooden crates repurposed as planters. A faint scent of herbs mingled with the lingering sweetness of baked sugar drifting from inside. Harper folded her arms, not out of defensiveness but from a reluctance to expose the vulnerability she carried into this conversation. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began quietly, her voice steady yet fragile. "About being here. About wanting to know Lily. About wanting to fix things between us." She paused, drawing a slow breath. "You have changed, Ethan. And I see it now. But change doesn't erase the past, and it doesn't guarantee the future. I need to know that you understand how big this is, not just for you, but for her. And for me." Ethan stepped closer, his voice low but unwavering. "Harper, I understand that I failed you before. I made choices that hurt you, choices that pushed me away from the life I should have fought for. I can't erase any of that. But I can choose differently now. I can choose you both, not out of guilt or obligation, but because I want a life that's real. I want to be someone Lily can depend on. I want to earn your trust back, not through promises, but through actions." Harper's eyes shone with emotion, though she didn't look away. "And what about your old life?" she asked. "Your company, your responsibilities, the world you used to believe in?" Ethan shook his head slowly. "Those things don't mean what they used to. They feel empty without something genuine to anchor them. I'm not walking away from my career, but it's no longer the thing I'm choosing above everything else. I've lived that way, and it nearly cost me my soul. I'm done living like a ghost in a glass tower." She studied him for a long moment, searching for the cracks, the false notes, the signs of a temporary transformation. But instead she found sincerity, a steady warmth, and a man who seemed profoundly humbled by the second chance fate had unexpectedly placed in front of him. She reached into the pocket of her apron, pulling out a folded sheet of paper covered in handwritten notes and bakery sketches. Ethan recognized her handwriting immediately, the same loops and flourishes he used to admire when she scribbled recipes on napkins in their old apartment. "I started planning a bigger bakery years ago," she admitted softly. "Not because I thought it would happen anytime soon, but because imagining it made the hard days easier." She unfolded the paper, smoothing the creases with her fingertips. "I never showed this to anyone. It felt too personal, too fragile. But if we're really going to try this, then you should see it." Ethan accepted the paper with reverence, as though she had handed him a piece of her heart. He studied the sketches: wide windows, rows of display cases, a small play corner for children, and notes about seasonal flavors written in the margins. His chest tightened with emotion he didn't bother hiding. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "And I want to help you build it. Not to take it over. Not to control it. Just to give you the support you deserved all along." Harper's breath trembled, and for a moment she looked as if she might break down, but instead she stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "Then let's take it slow," she murmured. "For Lily's sake. For mine. For yours. Let's see where this goes without rushing or forcing anything." Ethan nodded, overwhelmed with relief. "Slow is perfect," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Then, to his surprise, Harper leaned in and gently pressed her forehead against his chest. It wasn't a kiss, nor a declaration, but the quietest, most profound acceptance he could have wished for. He wrapped his arms around her slowly, carefully, as if he were holding something fragile and irreplaceable. In that moment, surrounded by the glow of string lights and the faint sound of Lily stirring inside, Ethan realized that everything he had once thought defined him, success, wealth, reputation, felt insignificant compared to the simple truth blooming between them. This, right here, was a beginning. When Harper finally lifted her head, her eyes sparkled with a softness he hadn't seen in years. "Welcome home, Ethan," she whispered, echoing the words she hadn't dared speak aloud before. And for the first time in a long time, he truly felt like he was.
Can I share this table? 5 words that changed 3 lives forever. A one-legged girl walks into a crowded cafe, desperate to feel close to the family she lost in a tragedy that took everything. A single father and his 6-year-old daughter sit at a corner table, unaware they're about to meet someone who will shatter and rebuild their world. Before we continue, please tell us, where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. The corner bean was packed that Saturday morning in late March. Portland's first real sunshine after months of gray winter had drawn everyone out. Couples on dates, students with laptops, families with strollers. Every table was full, every seat taken. Timothy Smith glanced up from his black coffee and caught sight of her. A young woman on crutches was navigating through the crowded cafe, blonde hair pulled into a loose ponytail, brown eyes scanning desperately for an empty seat. She moved with practiced efficiency despite the crutches. But what struck Timothy most was the expression on her face, determination mixed with something that looked like barely contained desperation. And then John's hamster escaped during show and tell and ran under Mrs. Faith's desk, and she screamed so loud. 6-year-old Starla was in the middle of an animated story, her hands gesturing wildly. Timothy smiled at his daughter, but kept watching the woman. She approached a table near the door where a couple sat close together, clearly on a date. He saw her speak to them, saw the woman shake her head firmly. The young woman on crutches nodded, apologized, and moved to another table where a man sat alone, papers and laptops spread everywhere. Again, she was refused. Timothy watched her shoulders slump, watched the way she bit her lip as if fighting back tears. "Daddy, are you even listening?" Starla's voice pulled him back. "Of course, sweetie, the hamster escaped. That was like 5 minutes ago. Now I'm telling you about—" But Timothy's attention had drifted again. The woman on crutches was standing in the middle of the cafe now, looking around with an expression that broke his heart. Lost. Alone. Like she was about to give up on something important. For a brief moment, their gazes met across the crowded cafe. Timothy saw vulnerability there, hope, and a deep sadness that seemed to radiate from her very core. She took a breath, adjusted her crutches, and started walking towards them. "Excuse me," she said softly when she reached their corner table by the window. Her voice was steady, but Timothy could hear the emotion trembling underneath. "I'm so sorry to bother you. I know this is probably strange, but would you mind if I shared this table with you? The cafe is completely full, and I—" She paused, and her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I really need to be here today. It's very important to me." Timothy stood immediately, pulling out the empty chair across from them. "Of course. Please, sit. I'm Timothy, and this is my daughter Starla." Relief washed over the young woman's face like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. She carefully settled into the chair and propped her crutches against the wall beside her. "Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm Moon." She looked at them both, and Timothy saw her eyes were wet with tears that hadn't quite fallen. "I asked those other tables first, but they said they needed privacy. I was starting to think I'd have to leave, and Her voice caught in her throat. "I really couldn't bear to leave without being here for a while." "We are happy to share our table," Timothy said warmly. "This place gets crazy when the weather's nice." Starla, never one to be shy, leaned forward with bright curiosity. "We come here every single Saturday. It's our special tradition. I always get hot chocolate with extra whipped cream, and Daddy gets boring black coffee." She wrinkled her nose at Timothy's mug. "Do you like hot chocolate?" Moon smiled, and despite the sadness that clung to her, the smile reached her eyes. "I love hot chocolate. That sounds perfect for today."
A server appeared, and Moon ordered coffee and a croissant. As the server left, Starla launched into conversation with the enthusiasm only a 6-year-old could muster. "I'm in first grade, and my teacher is Mrs. Faith, and she has a hamster in our classroom named Cheeto because he's orange and fluffy. Do you have any pets?" "I don't right now," Moon said, her fingers wrapped around her coffee cup like she was trying to absorb its warmth. "But I used to have a cat named Luna. She was gray with white paws." "That's such a pretty name. Luna means moon in Spanish. My friend Maya taught me that. Her family speaks Spanish." Moon's smile widened. "It does. That's exactly why I named her that." Timothy found himself relaxing as they talked. There was something about Moon. Despite the sadness she carried, she listened to Starla with genuine interest. She asked follow-up questions about school, about Cheeto the hamster, about Starla's best friend when she mentioned it. She laughed at the funny parts, gasped at the dramatic moments. They'd been sitting together for about 15 minutes when Moon carefully set down her coffee cup. She looked at both of them with an expression Timothy couldn't quite decipher. Gratitude mixed with something deeper, more painful. "I want to tell you both something. The reason I needed to be here today specifically, it's because today is my birthday. I'm 23 today." Starla's eyes went wide with pure delight. "It's your birthday?" And without a moment's hesitation, without asking permission or feeling any self-consciousness, Starla burst into song. "Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday, dear Moon, happy birthday to you." Timothy immediately joined in, his deeper voice blending with his daughter's enthusiastic, slightly off-key soprano. Several nearby patrons glanced over. A woman at the next table smiled and joined in for the final line. An older couple across the cafe added their voices too. When the song ended, Moon had tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling through them, and Timothy saw something shift in her expression, a crack in whatever armor she'd been wearing. That was... She wiped at her eyes with trembling fingers. "That was the most beautiful thing anyone's done for me in a very long time. Thank you, both of you." "Everyone needs birthday songs," Starla declared with absolute conviction. Then her face lit up with another idea. "Daddy, we need to get her a birthday cake. You can't have a birthday without cake."
"Oh no, please," Moon started to protest, shaking her head. Timothy glanced toward the display case near the counter where the cafe kept their fresh pastries and small cakes. "They actually make really good cakes here. Would that be okay? It's your birthday. You should definitely have cake." "You've both been so incredibly kind already," Moon said with her voice thick with emotion. "I don't want to be any trouble." "You're not trouble at all," Timothy said gently. "Really, please let us celebrate with you."
Despite Moon's continued protests, Timothy excused himself and went to the counter. He returned a few minutes later carrying a small chocolate cake with vanilla buttercream frosting and a single candle. When he lit the candle, several people at nearby tables noticed. Someone started singing again, and soon their entire corner of the cafe had joined in. Moon closed her eyes, and Timothy saw her lips move, making a wish. She blew out the candle. A small ripple of applause spread through the space. "Okay, birthday girl gets the first piece, and the biggest piece," Starla announced, taking charge of the cake distribution with serious authority. As they shared the cake, something shifted in the atmosphere. The sweetness of the moment, the unexpected kindness from strangers, seemed to crack open something in Moon that had been locked tight. "This cafe," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, staring down at her plate. "This was my family's place. Our Saturday morning tradition, exactly like yours." Timothy felt his chest tighten. He glanced at Starla, who had stopped eating her cake, her intuitive child sense picking up on the weight of what was coming. Moon looked up, meeting Timothy's eyes. "Me, my little sister Kennedy, and our parents. We live just a few blocks from here, in a small apartment above a bookstore. My dad was a firefighter at Station 14, and my mom was a pediatric nurse at Dornbecker Children's Hospital." She paused, and Timothy saw her hands begin to tremble around her fork.
"We never had much money, but Saturday mornings here at the Corner Bean, these were the happiest times of my entire life. Kennedy would always order strawberry waffles with extra syrup. My dad made these terrible jokes that made my mom groan but made us laugh. My mom would steal bites of everyone's food. We'd sit at a table just like this one, and for those few hours, nothing else mattered." Timothy reached across the table instinctively, placing his hand gently over hers. "What happened, Moon?" She closed her eyes, and a tear slipped down her cheek. "2 years ago, there was a gas leak in our apartment building. The landlord had been warned multiple times about the old, corroded pipes. He always said he'd get to it next month, next month, next month. We were all asleep when it happened." Her voice broke, fracturing into pieces. "The explosion... I woke up in the hospital 3 days later. The entire building had collapsed. I was trapped under concrete and steel beams for almost 6 hours before the rescue team could reach me. My left leg was completely crushed. The doctor said there was no way to save it. They had to amputate it." Starla's eyes were wide, shimmering with tears. Timothy tightened his grip on Moon's hand. "My parents and Kennedy..." Moon's voice shattered completely. "They didn't make it out. They died in the collapse." Kennedy was only 14 years old. She wanted to be a veterinarian because she loved every single animal she ever met. She used to bring home stray cats, nurse injured birds back to health, cry over roadkill. She had the biggest heart. The tears were streaming down Moon's face now, and Timothy felt his own eyes burning. "And my parents, they spent their entire adult lives saving other people. My dad ran into burning buildings. My mom fought to save sick children every day. But they couldn't save themselves. They couldn't save Kennedy. They couldn't save me." Before Timothy could respond, Starla slipped silently out of her chair and walked around the table. Without saying a word, she wrapped her small arms around Moon and hugged her tightly. "I'm so sorry your family died," Starla said softly, her voice carrying that pure, unfiltered empathy that only children seem capable of. "That's the saddest thing I ever heard. But you're not alone right now. We're here with you." Moon pulled Starla closer and sobbed into her hair. Timothy came around too, placing a comforting hand on Moon's shoulder. They stayed like that for what felt like a long time. Three people who'd been strangers less than an hour ago, now connected by unexpected kindness and shared understanding of loss. When Moon finally composed herself, she looked at them both with red-rimmed eyes. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to fall apart like that." "You don't need to apologize. Not for grief. Not ever," Timothy said firmly. Moon wiped her face with a napkin, taking a shaky breath. "I live with my aunt now, up in Vancouver, Washington. She took me in after I got out of rehab for my leg. But it doesn't feel like home. Nothing feels like home anymore." She looked around the cafe, her gaze landing on different tables, different corners. "Today's my birthday, and all I wanted was to come back here, to this cafe, to feel close to them again. This was where we were happiest. I thought if I could just sit here at one of these tables, maybe I could feel like they weren't completely gone. But when I got here and saw how crowded it was, I almost left." She looked at Timothy, and fresh tears welled in her eyes.
"And then you said yes. You let me sit here. You sang to me. You got me cake. You made me feel like I mattered on a day when I felt completely alone in the world." "You do matter," Starla said with absolute certainty, still standing beside Moon's chair. "And you're not alone. You have us now." Timothy smiled at his daughter's pure heart. He thought about how they'd been coming to this cafe for 3 years, ever since his divorce with Lumen was finalized. How Saturday mornings had become their sacred time, their moment of peace and the chaos of single parenthood. "She's right," Timothy said. "You don't have to be alone today. We were planning to go to the park this afternoon. Nothing fancy, just our usual Saturday. You're welcome to join us if you'd like." Moon looked surprised. "Are you sure? I don't want to intrude on your time together." "You're not intruding," Timothy said. "We'd like you to come. Really." Moon hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "I would really love that. Thank you." They spent the rest of that afternoon at Laurelhurst Park. Starla played on the swings, while Timothy and Moon sat on a bench, talking in the way people do when they sense a connection that feels both surprising and inevitable. "How long have you been doing the Saturday morning tradition?" Moon asked, watching Starla pump her legs higher on the swing set. 3 years now," Timothy said, and for the first time, he opened up about his own story. "Since my divorce was finalized. Starla was 3 when her mom and I split up." "I'm sorry," Moon said softly. "That must have been hard."
Timothy nodded, surprised at how easy it felt to talk to her. It was, but it was also necessary. Lumen and I, that's Starla's mom, we married young, 22, right out of college. We thought we wanted the same things, but we didn't. She's an artist, a free spirit. She wanted spontaneity, adventure, last-minute road trips. I'm more of a homebody. I like routines, quiet mornings, stability. He paused, watching Starla jump off the swing and run toward the monkey bars. When Starla was born, we both tried so hard to make it work. But trying to be someone you're not, it's exhausting. We weren't angry at each other, we just fell out of love, gradually, like colors fading in the sun. "That sounds harder than anger," Moon observed. "It was," Timothy admitted, "because there was no one to blame. No betrayal, no dramatic fight, just the sad realization that loving someone isn't always enough if you want fundamentally different lives." Moon was quiet for a moment. "Where is she now?" "Seattle. She's a curator at a gallery up there. She visits twice a month and calls Starla regularly. The divorce was amicable. We did mediation instead of lawyers. I got primary custody because my teaching job is more stable, and Starla needed that consistency. You're a teacher, Timothy smiled. Middle school art. It's chaos and creativity and hormones all mixed together, but I love it. Art teacher, Moon said, something lighting up in her eyes. That's perfect. You have that energy. Patient, observant, creative.
And what about you? Timothy asked. You mentioned graphic design? Moon nodded. Freelance. I work from home, which has been good since the amputation. I had to completely relearn my workflow. I used to pace around my apartment while brainstorming, sketch standing up at an easel. Now, I do most of my work sitting, using a tablet. It took months to adapt, but I got there. That's incredibly resilient. I didn't have much choice, Moon said quietly. It was adapt or give up, and I had already lost everything else. I wasn't going to lose my career, too. They discovered more shared interests as the afternoon wore on. They both loved hiking, though Moon hadn't been on a trail since the accident. They both preferred indie films to blockbusters. They both thought the smell of Portland after rain was the best smell in the world. They both loved bookstores with creaky floors and coffee shops with mismatched furniture. When evening came and they finally parted ways in the parking lot, they exchanged phone numbers. Thank you for today, Moon said, her eyes still a bit puffy, but genuinely happy for the first time. You and Starla turned what I thought would be the loneliest, most painful birthday of my life into something beautiful. I'll never forget this. Same place next Saturday? Timothy asked, surprising himself with how much he hoped she'd say yes. Moon's face lit up. I would absolutely love that. The texts started that night. Moon, thank you again for today. I can't stop thinking about how kind you both were to a complete stranger. You're not a stranger anymore, Timothy said. You're our friend. And friends don't thank friends for birthday cake. It's in the Friendship Handbook. Page 47.
I'll have to read that handbook more carefully. Timothy, it's a thrilling read, right up there with assembly instructions and tax forms. The following Saturday, Moon showed up at the corner bean wearing a nervous smile, but the moment Starla saw her, she squealed with delight and ran over for a hug. And just like that, it felt like Moon had always been part of their Saturday tradition. The weeks turned into months. Moon started joining them for other things too. Trips to Powell, City of Books, where they'd get lost in different sections and text each other ridiculous book titles they found. Movie nights at Timothy's apartment after Starla went to bed, where they'd argue good-naturedly about plot holes and character motivations. Starla's school art show, where Moon stood next to Timothy and took photos like a proud aunt. Moon taught Starla how to draw cartoon characters, sitting at Timothy's kitchen table with colored pencils spread everywhere. Timothy and Moon would text late into the night about everything and nothing. Funny memes, random observations about their days, deep conversations about grief and hope and rebuilding. 2 months after they met, Moon made a decision. I'm moving to Portland, she told Timothy one evening. They were sitting on his couch after Starla had gone to bed, watching a documentary neither of them was really paying attention to. Timothy's heart did a little flip. Really? My aunt is supportive. She knows I need to rebuild my life, and living away from the one place that feels like home, it doesn't make sense. I've been looking at apartments in the neighborhood. There's a studio available 3 blocks from here. That's amazing, Timothy said, trying to keep his voice casual even though his heart was racing. I can help you move. You don't have to. I want to. When moving day came, Timothy recruited a few of his teacher friends. They carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs, assembled furniture, hung pictures. Moon ordered pizza for everyone, and by the end of the day, her studio apartment felt like home.
3 months into their friendship, Moon was fully integrated into their lives. She knew that Starla hated broccoli but loved Brussels sprouts. She knew that Timothy graded papers better with instrumental jazz playing in the background. She knew their coffee orders by heart. She'd become the person Timothy texted first when something funny happened, the person whose opinion he valued, the person whose laugh made his entire day better. And one afternoon in June, sitting in a coffee shop, not the corner bean, somewhere new, Timothy realized his feelings had shifted from platonic to something deeper. Moon was laughing at something ridiculous that had happened at her graphic design client meeting, her head thrown back, the afternoon light catching her hair just right, and Timothy's heart did a little flip. He was falling in love with her. Maybe he had been for a while. But he didn't say anything. Moon had been through so much trauma. She was 9 years younger than him. He had a daughter to think about. What if he misread the signals and scared her away? What if pursuing something romantic ruined the friendship they'd built? So he kept quiet, treasuring what they had while silently wishing for more. 4 months into their friendship, everything changed. It was a Tuesday evening in early August. Timothy was grading student artwork at his kitchen table while Starla colored nearby. His phone rang. Lumen's name on the screen. "Hey, Lumen, is everything okay?" "Yes, actually, I'm calling with good news." She sounded excited, energized in a way he hadn't heard in years. "I got a job offer at the Portland Art Museum, a curatorial position with the path to senior curator within 2 years. It's exactly what I've been working toward, Timothy, and it means I'd be moving back to Portland." Timothy's hand tightened on the phone. "You're moving back here?" "I'm planning to, yes. I've been thinking about it for a while now, even before this job came up. I've regretted not being more present in Starla's life. Seeing her twice a month isn't enough. I want to be a real mom to her, not just a visitor. This job is the perfect opportunity." That's great, Lumen. Starla would love to see you more often. "There's something else I wanted to talk to you about," Lumen said, her voice softening. "I've been doing a lot of therapy. A lot of self-reflection. I've been thinking about us, about our marriage." Timothy's stomach dropped. "Lumen, hear me out," she said quickly. "We were so young when we got married. We let stress and our differences pull us apart. But maybe we gave up too quickly. Maybe, with some time and growth and maturity, we could try again. Not immediately, but eventually. Think about it, Timothy. A real family for Starla. Both her parents together, giving her the stability and love she deserves." Timothy felt like he couldn't breathe. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything right now. I know it's a lot. Just think about it. For Starla's sake, if nothing else." After they hung up, Timothy sat frozen at the table, his mind spinning in circles. Starla looked up from her coloring. "Was that Mommy?" "Yes, sweetheart." "Is she coming to visit soon?" Timothy took a breath. "Actually, Mommy might be moving back to Portland for a new job." Starla's face exploded with joy. "Really? Mommy's coming back here? That's the best news ever!" She bounced in her seat, her coloring forgotten. "Oh, Daddy, this is so great. I can see her all the time, and maybe if she's here, you and Mommy could be together again, like a real family, like Harper's parents. We could all live together." Timothy's heart sank. "Sweetie, it's not that simple." "But it could be," Starla insisted with childhood optimism. "If Mommy's here and you're here, you could fall back in love. That happens in movies all the time, and then we'd be a real family, and I wouldn't have to go back and forth, and we could have dinner together every night." Sometimes the people we love want things we can't give them. Have you ever been in that impossible position? That Saturday, at the Corner Bean, Moon immediately sensed something was off. Timothy was distracted, quieter than usual, barely touching his coffee. "Hey," she said gently, after Starla skipped off to look at the pastry display. "What's going on? You seem a million miles away." Timothy sighed, rubbing his face. "Lumen called. She got a job offer in Portland. She's moving back." "Oh." Moon's expression shifted subtly. Something Timothy couldn't quite read flickered across her face. That's good though, right? Starla will get to see her more." Yeah, it'll be good for Starla." "Is there something else?" Moon asked carefully. Timothy hesitated. How could he tell her that Lumen wanted to try again, that his ex-wife had suggested rekindling their marriage, that he was confused about what any of it meant? Just a lot of changes coming, a lot to figure out.
What Timothy didn't know was that later that afternoon, when he'd stepped away to take a phone call from his sister, Starla had told Moon everything, with a child's complete lack of filter. "Guess what, Miss Moon?" Starla had said, practically vibrating with excitement. "My mommy is moving back to Portland, and I told Daddy that maybe they could fall back in love and we could all be a family together. Isn't that the best idea ever? Then I'd have both my parents in the same house. Moon had felt something crack inside her chest. That would be really wonderful for you, Starla, she'd managed to say through a smile that felt frozen on her face. I really hope it happens, Starla had continued, completely oblivious to Moon's pain. I pray about it every night. I want my mommy and daddy together again. That night, Moon lay awake in her studio apartment, staring at the ceiling as the Portland rain drummed against her window. Of course Timothy would want his family back together. Of course he'd choose to give Starla what she so desperately wanted. Both her parents, a complete family unit. What could Moon possibly offer that would compare to that? She was just some broken girl who'd stumbled into their lives at a cafe. She had no right to stand in the way of Starla getting her intact family. And Timothy? He'd never indicated he saw her as anything more than a friend. She'd been foolish to let herself fall in love with him. Foolish to imagine he might feel the same way.
Over the next 2 weeks, Moon slowly began pulling away. Timothy's tried to stay optimistic, but it was becoming harder and harder. He missed his morning coffees with Moon and the spark she brought to their evenings. Want to come over for movie night Friday? I can't, sorry. Swamped with a big freelance deadline. Saturday coffee? Not feeling great. Rain check? Next Saturday, I have to drive to Vancouver to help my aunt with something. Timothy was confused and hurt. Had he done something wrong? Said something to upset her? The shift had happened right after he'd mentioned Lumen moving back. He tried calling, but Moon let it go to voicemail. Did I do something? Please talk to me. I miss you. Moon's response came hours later. I just think I've been imposing too much on your time with Starla. You two need your space, especially with everything changing. Timothy stared at the message, completely baffled. Imposing? She was part of their family now. How could she think she was imposing? On their third Saturday without Moon, Starla looked around the corner beam with confused, sad eyes. Where's Miss Moon? Why doesn't she come anymore? Did we do something to make her mad? No, sweetie, she's just busy.
But she was never too busy before, Starla said, her voice small and wounded. I miss her, Daddy. She's my friend. I miss her too, Timothy admitted. That evening, after putting Starla to bed, Timothy sat on his couch trying to make sense of everything. Moon's withdrawal had started right after he'd mentioned Lumen, and Starla had been so excited about her parents potentially getting back together. Unless... The realization hit him like a freight train. Starla must have told Moon about wanting her parents back together, and Moon, sweet Moon who'd lost her entire family, probably thought she was standing in the way of Starla getting hers back. She was sacrificing her own happiness and their friendship because she thought it was the right thing to do for Starla. Timothy grabbed his keys. 20 minutes later, he was knocking on Moon's apartment door. When she opened it, surprise and something like panic flashed across her face. Timothy, what are you doing here? Is Starla okay? Starla's fine. She's with my neighbor. We need to talk. Please. Moon hesitated, then stepped aside to let him in. Her studio apartment was small but cozy, decorated with photos of her late family on every surface. They sat on her second-hand couch, and Timothy turned to face her directly. You're pulling away because of Lumen, aren't you? Moon's eyes immediately filled with tears. Timothy, Starla told you, didn't she, about wanting Lumen and me to get back together? Moon looked down at her hands, twisting them in her lap. She's excited about having both her parents in the same city, and she should be excited. She deserves to have a complete family, Timothy. Both her parents loving each other, all living together. After everything she's been through with the divorce, she deserves that fairy tale ending. Moon, look at me, please. She met his eyes, and he saw tears spilling down her cheeks. I need you to understand something, Timothy said firmly, reaching for her hands. Lumen and I are not getting back together. We're not in love. We haven't been for years. Moving to the same city doesn't change that fundamental truth.
but she wants to try again. She mentioned it as a possibility, Timothy corrected, and I haven't seriously considered it for even a second. Lumen and I don't belong together. We never really did. We were young and in love with the idea of love, but we weren't compatible as life partners. That hasn't changed. But Starla wants... Starla is 6 years old, Timothy said gently but firmly. She has fantasies about fairy tale endings where everyone lives happily ever after in the same house. But that's not reality, and that's not what's best for her. Lumen and I can both be excellent parents to Starla without being married to each other. Starla will understand that as she gets older. Timothy. I'm not finished, he said, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it. I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me. These past 4 months have been some of the happiest months of my life since my divorce. Not because of convenience or circumstance, but because of you. Moon's breath caught.
Because you make me laugh in ways I forgot I could. Because you see the world through this lens that fascinates me. Because you're kind and resilient and real and beautiful. Because when I'm with you, everything feels right in a way it never ever felt with Lumen. Tears were streaming down Moon's face now. You can't say things like that. Why not? It's the truth. Timothy took both her hands in his, holding them tightly. You're not standing in the way of anything, Moon. You're not an obstacle to my family. You are my family. You have been since that day you asked to share our table. Starla loves you. He took a shaky breath. I love you. I'm in love with you. I have been for weeks, maybe months, and I hope you might feel the same way. Moon stared at him, tears streaming down her face, her breath coming in shaky gasps. I do. I've been falling in love with you since you sang happy birthday to a stranger and made her feel seen. But I couldn't. I thought I was being selfish. I couldn't let myself hope that you... Timothy pulled her into his arms, and she sobbed against his chest, months of suppressed feelings pouring out. He held her tightly, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other wrapped around her waist. You're allowed to hope, he murmured in her hair. You're allowed to want things. You're allowed to be loved, Moon. You're allowed to be happy.
I love you, Moon said, pulling back to look at him through her tears. I love you so much, and I love Starla, but I'm so scared. Of what? Of messing this up. Of you realizing I'm not enough. Of Starla resenting me for not being her mother. Of... Timothy kissed her. It was soft and gentle and full of months of unspoken longing, full of all the words he'd been too afraid to say. When they pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. You are enough, he said firmly, his hands cupping her face. You are more than enough, and we'll figure everything out together. Lumen moving back, the new co-parenting arrangement, all of it. But please don't pull away from us. Don't leave us. We need you. I won't leave, Moon promised, her hands clutching his shirt like a lifeline. I'm sorry I tried to. I'm so sorry. You don't have to apologize, Timothy said, kissing her forehead. You being in our lives is what's right. They held each other for a long time, the Portland rain continuing its steady rhythm against the window, washing away fear and doubt and leaving only the truth between them. The next morning, Timothy sat Starla down for an important conversation at their kitchen table. Sweetie, I need to talk to you about Mommy moving back to Portland. Starla looked up at him with hopeful eyes, a piece of toast halfway to her mouth. Mommy and Daddy both love you more than anything in the world, and Mommy wants to move here so she can see you much more often, which is wonderful. But, he took a breath, Mommy and Daddy are not getting back together. Starla's face fell, the toast forgotten. But why? If she's here... Because sometimes people who care about each other realize they're better as friends than as married people. Mommy and I tried really hard when we were married, but we just weren't happy together the way married people should be. We made each other sad more than we made each other happy. But I want us all to be together, Starla said, her voice quavering, tears welling in her eyes. "I know, sweetheart, and I understand why you want that. But we are together, just in a different way. You have Mommy who loves you, and you have Daddy who loves you. We're both here for you. That's what matters. Not whether we live in the same house or are married to each other." Starla was quiet for a moment, processing. "Is it because of Miss Moon?" "No," Timothy said firmly, taking her small hands in his. "Mommy and I made our choice to divorce long before I ever met Miss Moon. But I do need to tell you something about Miss Moon." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I love her, Starla. Not just as a friend, but the way grown-ups love each other when they want to be together." To his surprise, Starla's expression softened. "Like boyfriend and girlfriend?" "Yes, exactly like that." Starla was quiet for another moment, her 6-year-old mind working through complex emotions. Then she said, "I like Miss Moon. She's really nice, and you smile a lot when she's around. You laugh more." Timothy felt tears prick his eyes. "I do smile more when she's around. Can she still come to Saturday coffee with us?" "Always, sweetheart, always." Starla nodded slowly, then climbed into Timothy's lap and hugged him. "I still wish you and Mommy could be together," she said honestly, her small voice muffled against his chest. "But I guess if you're happy with Miss Moon, that's okay too. Thank you for understanding, baby girl."
When Lumen moved back to Portland 6 weeks later, she and Timothy worked out a new custody arrangement over coffee at a neutral cafe. Starla would stay with Lumen every other weekend and one weeknight for dinner. It took some adjustment, but it worked. The first time Lumen came to pick up Starla from Timothy's apartment, she met Moon. After Starla ran excitedly to pack her overnight bag, the two women stood somewhat awkwardly in the doorway. Lumen was exactly as Moon had pictured, tall, artistic, with paint-stained fingers and expressive eyes. "So, you're Moon," Lumen said, and her expression was hard to read. "I am," Moon said quietly, her heart racing. "I want you to know I'm not trying to replace you. You're Starla's mother. I would never—" She knew what I was saying. "I know," Lumen interrupted, and to Moon's surprise, she smiled. It was genuine, reaching her eyes. "Starla talks about you constantly. Miss Moon taught me this, Miss Moon said that. I can tell she loves you, and I can see that you make Timothy happy in ways I never could." She paused, glancing back toward Timothy, who was in Starla's room, helping her pack. "I thought I wanted to try again with him, but the truth is, I was lonely, and I confused wanting to be a better mom with wanting to be his wife again. Those are two different things." She looked back at Moon. "I'm actually glad he found you. Take care of them. They're both pretty special." Moon felt tears spring to her eyes. "Thank you. That means more than you know." "Take good care of my girl," Lumen said, her voice soft. "Not just Timothy, Starla too." "I will. I absolutely will."
Over time, Lumen and Moon developed a respectful co-parenting relationship built on their shared love for Starla. There were awkward moments and adjustments, school events, holidays, but they navigated them with grace and maturity, always putting Starla first. 8 months after that first meeting at the Corner Bean, on a Saturday morning at their usual table, Timothy got down on one knee. Starla stood beside him, wearing her best dress and holding a small velvet box, practically vibrating with barely contained excitement. The cafe had quieted, other patrons noticing what was happening. "Moon Walsh," Timothy said, taking her hand while she stared at him in shock. "That day you asked to share our table, you changed our lives completely. You brought light and love and laughter back into our world. You showed me what real partnership looks like. You've been patient with Starla's adjustment. You've been gracious with Lumen. You've been everything I didn't know I needed." His voice wavered with emotion. "Will you Marry us. Will you officially become part of our family? Moon was crying and laughing at the same time, her hand covering her mouth. Yes! Yes, absolutely yes! Starla opened the box to reveal a beautiful ring, simple, elegant, with a small diamond that caught the morning light. The whole cafe erupted in applause, the same patrons who'd sung happy birthday 8 months ago, now celebrating this new beginning. Timothy slipped the ring on Moon's finger and kissed her, and Starla threw her arms around both of them. The owner of the corner bean brought out a bottle of champagne for Timothy and Moon and hot chocolate for Starla, on the house. "To the family that started at table 7, someone shouted, and everyone raised their cups. 6 months later, they married on a warm Saturday morning in September.
The ceremony took place at the corner bean, at the corner table where it had all begun. The cafe owner had closed the space for the morning, transforming it with simple white flowers and strings of lights. Starla was the flower girl, wearing the green dress she'd picked out herself, and she announced anyone who would listen that she'd known they were in love for forever and ever. Lumen came and took photos, genuinely happy for them. She'd brought her new girlfriend, an art restorer she'd met at the museum, and they sat together in the front row. When it was time for vows, Timothy spoke first. "Moon, when you asked if you could share our table, you gave me more than company for coffee. You gave me hope. You taught me that families aren't just born, they're built, one kind moment at a time. You showed Starla what resilience looks like. You showed me what love should feel like. I promise to always make room at our table for you, to celebrate every birthday like it's the most important day of the year, and to remind you every single day that you are exactly where you belong." Moon's hands trembled as she held his. "Timothy, I came to this cafe on the worst birthday of my life, looking for ghosts. Instead, I found a future. You and Starla didn't just let me share your table, you made room in your hearts. You taught me that grief and joy can exist together, that broken doesn't mean worthless, and that family is what you make it. I promise to love you both with everything I have, to honor the family you've welcomed me into, and to never forget that the best things in life start with a simple question. Can I share this table?" When they kissed, the small gathering erupted in cheers. Starla jumped up and down, and somewhere in the crowd, someone started singing, fittingly, "Happy Wedding Day to You," which made everyone laugh through their tears.
They cut a small chocolate cake with vanilla buttercream frosting, exactly like the one from that first birthday. Moon closed her eyes and made a wish, the same wish she'd been making for months: gratitude. As they danced their first dance in the narrow space between tables, Moon rested her head on Timothy's shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for asking," Timothy whispered back. And Starla, watching her dad and her new stepmom dance, leaned against Lumen and said, "Mommy, did you know that sometimes fairy tales are real? They just don't look like the ones in books." Lumen kissed the top of her daughter's head. "You're absolutely right, sweetie. Sometimes they look like this." Their story had started with a birthday song and a slice of cake, with a young woman brave enough to ask for what she needed, and a single father kind enough to say yes, with one simple truth that changed 3 lives forever. Sometimes, all it takes is making room at your table for someone who needs a place to belong. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe so you never miss stories like this, and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Because sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change absolutely everything. Thank you for sharing this table with us.